Matthew, we're almost finished with the first volume of Barclay. Yeah. So, anyhow, so we are on page 405. We're starting with Matthew 9. And so we've been going through the past couple of weeks a series of miracles. You know, after we finished the Sermon on the Mount, chapters 8 and 9 are a series of miracles interspersed with teachings. And there's a general pattern of 3 healings, and then 3 teachings, and then 3 healings, and then sort of 3, and that's a general pattern. But anyhow, just an interesting aside. So, and last week we ended with the healing of the blind man, that Jesus had him come into the house rather than doing it out in the crowd. He had him come into the house, touching his eyes, telling him that he was being healed according to his faith, and telling him not to tell anyone. But then he went out and told everybody, told the whole country. So, all right, so who's, and Sarah usually volunteers first, so Sarah, doing verses 32 through 34 of chapter 9.
Okay, here goes. As they were going away, look you, they brought to him a dumb man who was demon-possessed. And when the demon had been expelled from him, he spoke, and the crowds were amazed. Nothing like this, they said, was ever seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he cast out the demons by the power of the prince of the demons.
So I thought Barclay made one of his first statements about this passage an interesting statement that I really hadn't thought about before, that it's impossible to have an attitude of neutrality toward Jesus. So, and we can see that in this passage. So, so while people were amazed, like, oh my gosh, we've never seen anything like this, the Pharisees are going, it's just the devil. It's just the devil doing it. So anyhow, so Barclay goes on to talk about the Pharisees and why they had this kind of attitude. And we've talked about this kind of stuff before. They were too set in their ways to change. They were too proud of their self-satisfaction to submit to Jesus. They were too prejudiced to see Jesus' glory. You know, we've talked a little bit before about how that we all need that precaution in our lives. I know I am having to be more conscious of that when something new comes along. And I've wondered with our new co-pastor coming, you know, what challenges he might bring to us in some of our thinking and the way we do things. So I want to work to be sure that I am open to him and his thinking. You know, from what I've seen of him, I think he's going to be very gracious. But whenever there's a new person coming in, you know, can be a challenge to be open to that new person. And any of us who've worked in schools have been through that every time there's a new principal, a new superintendent, whatever. So, all right. Barclay also makes the point that he talks about the sense of need, you know, that the Pharisees didn't see themselves as having a sense of need for Jesus. But Barclay makes a point that those who have a sense of need will always see wonders in Jesus Christ. And that, I love the hope in that statement. Moving on to verse 35. And Jesus made a tour. So we have a healing. Now we're going to have a sort of a statement about what Jesus is doing. As Jesus made a tour of all the towns and villages, teaching in synagogues and heralding forth the news of the kingdom and healing every disease and every illness. Does that sound familiar? Would somebody like to look back to Matthew 4:23?
I have it.
Okay.
Jesus made a circular tour of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing all kinds of diseases and ailments among the people. And the report of his activities went out to all over Syria.
Yep. So, and that verse was shortly before the Sermon on the Mount, and here we are post Sermon on the Mount. So part of Matthew's style and how he has organized the book. So that threefold activity, Barclay talks about that Jesus was the herald, that a herald was one who brings messages from the king, and Jesus was the herald for God, and that so that he was a teacher, obviously, and that he was a healer. And so that translation from teaching to deeds, and the importance of moving from and using teachings, incorporating them into our deeds, into our daily lives. And Barclay makes the point, we are not truly Christian until our Christian belief issues in Christian action. So it's not just enough to talk about it, but we got to live it. And, when I look at these faces in this group, I see that in each of you. So moving on to verse 36. When he saw the crowds, he was moved with compassion to the depths of his being, for they were bewildered and dejected, like sheep who have no shepherd. Barclay talks about how the Greek word for compassion, or moved with compassion, that Greek word, and I tried to pronounce it and I won't embarrass myself. That Greek word is the strongest word in Greek for the word pity. That it's formed out of two words, one meaning the bowels, which would be the depth of our bodies. And it describes the compassion which moves people to the deepest depths of their being. So that compassion, Jesus being moved with compassion, was clearly a deep within his soul compassion. And so Jesus was moved by the world's pain. He was moved by the world's sorrow, by the world's hunger, by the world's loneliness, as well as the world's bewilderment. And so as I read through this, for some reason, the thoughts kept coming to mind as we hopefully are moving out of this pandemic. And there's been so much this past year, just in terms of the suffering related to the pandemic, but also the suffering from racial tensions, political tensions, the isolation, the loneliness. The question came to me as far as, what are we hoping to take with us? Jesus here in Matthew is at a crossroads, He's come out of the teachings from the Sermon on the Mount. As we move into the next passages, he's giving commission to his disciples, apostles, and we're also at a crossroads. So I wonder if any of you have thought about what it is you hope to take with you out of this experience of the past year. Obviously, there are things we want to leave behind, but what are we hoping to take with us?
I think that the joy of personal interaction and being with family and friends, to me, it seems so much more heightened now.
Going out to dinner.
We've gone out to dinner with friends a couple of times, 5 of us as a group, and then with another friend that we take out because she has no car, and we help her a lot. But the thing that I have said after we finish one of those sessions is, didn't we just get started? it's like we've been together for 3 hours, and it's very different from what used to happen. I mean, 3 hours seemed like 3 hours. Now when we're done, it's like, haven't we just been together for about 20 minutes?
Hmm. That was my experience yesterday with the friends I went out to lunch with, one of whom had been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer about a year ago. And amazingly, she is now in remission.
Wow.
So, but two of us hadn't really seen Carol since that time. And so at the end of our 3-hour lunch, when I got in the car and saw what time it was, I was like, well, I thought I've only been there for about an hour maybe. And we'd been together for 3. Yeah.
I feel like I've been in a hole for a year and I just want to get back up to the ground. I mean, I feel like I've been in a pit. And I just want to get back up to level ground and go back to doing what I used to do a year ago. I don't know that I'm taking anything good or positive with me because I feel like everything that's happened in the last year has been negative. Politically,
What about the time?
medically,
What about the time you spent with your grandkids?
I wasn't allowed to see them. We had to see them outside with a mask.
Well, but the twins you were
Oh,
with,
yeah. Well, that was work. Oh, that wore me out. Um, I was kind of glad to go home at the end of the day.
yeah, but the impact you had on their lives during that time, kitten.
True, but I mean, I feel like I lost so much living. I mean, there's so much living that we didn't do in 2020 that we can never get back. We can never go out to eat with those friends. We can never meet as Sunday school classes. We canceled multiple vacations. I'm not really taking anything positive. Well, other than the fact that I didn't lose a loved one to COVID. I don't know that I'm taking anything positive, Kathy. I want to.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that because there's one thing you have talked about.
What?
And that's being in this Sunday school class.
Well, that's true. That is true. That is true.
And I'm going to challenge her with something else. I think that she has a deeper appreciation for life outside of the pandemic than she did before.
Well, probably because so much was denied to us in the last year.
And we took it for granted, being with friends and family and just being able to go out and do whatever. I think we will all have a deeper appreciation of just being able to do it without thinking. It'll be a long time before we do it without thinking.
I mean, Sunday school couldn't meet, church couldn't meet, CWF, hiking club, book club. I was so active in so many things and I feel like I've done nothing for a year.
Yeah,
But you've still been part of worship. You've still been part of CWF. You still, so things changed.
Right.
They were different.
Right.
I think to think that we have to do so many of these kinds of things where you're always out and always doing something and always doing this and always doing that and thinking that that's what makes your life, that's what makes your life busy. But you, Kitten, you said that just last week, coming back from that cabin, is this what it feels like to do nothing?
Yeah.
Well, you need that experience of this is what it feels like to do nothing. Because like Bud had said last week, we're human beings, not human doings. You don't always have to be doing something to make your life valuable.
I kind of feel guilty when I'm not doing something meaningful, though. I really don't. I haven't learned to enjoy doing nothing.
It isn't meaningful. Being with yourself and being with God individually isn't meaningful. So I think you need to think about what a blessing your experience of this pandemic has been for you personally.
Thanks for the insight.
Yeah,
I'm appreciative of the technology of Zoom and things, because I think that some of us that are approaching the elderly age are thinking about how we will continue to participate, when we're not getting out as much and whatever. And I'm very appreciative of Zoom, and I think hopefully a possibility of a future Zoom ministry from the church. And, you know, I'd like to help whatever I could to, you know, make that happen.
Well, with the Zoom, I mean, Nancy is here from a campground and Claire's here from Tennessee. And in other meetings, we have Jerry Rope and other,
Had
I guess,
Clay here from
Clay,
Nebraska.
and some people have been in
Sandy
Florida.
from Texas.
So
And one of the
that's
things
a good
that
thing.
some of us have been involved in our careers when we were working with being on the side where you're trying to get people to use online training. If I was with was Soft Chalk, which was developing a software package that allowed teachers to develop their own online training without having to know how to do programming.
And my work
And
was,
his work also was an online training, and no one, and so many people were hesitant to get it. And it's kind of like, see how, you know, you needed it now, you know. So it's like there are bad things to online training, but there are good things too. And so at least now people have experienced it. And so it's the good things can be carried on afterward. You know, after we can get back together again, we still have the option of meeting with Claire every week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I guess I just didn't really appreciate how even the simplest things that you do, like going to a coffee shop and spending an hour, how important that is for, you know, for people who don't live in a house full of people. It's just incredibly important. And when that goes away, I mean, this has just been bizarre. But you know, I understand what Kitten is saying, because I'm digging deep to try to find the good that I will take away from this. And yes, you're all completely correct. And yet it's hard for me. It's like, you know, eating your vegetables. You know it's good for you, you know you should do it, but that's not always what you feel like doing. So I know I should be appreciating this whole situation instead of looking at it as to, you know, the negative side. But the negative has been so significant that it's like, whoa, you know, that's like ignoring the 800-pound gorilla in the room, as they say.
and I feel a little guilt, and I feel like we're dumping on Kit. But so I think maybe that for me means I need to reflect on that experience that you're having, and especially I think, Claire, you live by yourself and are in a box by yourself, and I haven't had that experience, thankfully. I've had Susan, and I have 3/4 acres of endless projects and everything, so it hasn't been the same experience, and I need to really be more appreciative of what other people have gone through.
And yet I, you know, I have no understanding, and so many of you do, about how the challenges of people who have kids that have to be, you know, taught online now, and how that has disrupted their lives, and how I can't even imagine how they've gotten through it, how they've continued their work, how they've taught their kids at home. Wow.
Most
were
of the
hoping-
people I've talked to, Claire, school has been basically a wasted year and a half.
Wow.
Absolutely wasted. Teachers have said they've done almost nothing. And there's a huge significant percent of kids that log in, put up some screen, and they walk away. They're not even actively participating. It's been horrible for teachers. The failure rate in Chesterfield is through the roof.
And
Wow.
that's a natural, you know, I deal with that. That's my job every day. And that has been very challenging and very painful at times. Because so
Kids
many
have
of the
lost
kids
a year and a half.
well, and there are many levels to that. And, you know, if we hadn't done that, you know, it's hard to imagine if we hadn't done that, how bad would the virus have been? You know, because I have to keep reminding myself the enemy was the virus. And what we've had to do to protect us, you know, because my great grandmother lost a baby lost a 2-year-old to the Spanish flu in 1918 and gave birth to her 3rd child 2 days later, and nobody could bury the baby. So I grew up with horrible stories about the pandemic from 1918. And so I appreciated the precautions, but they, dealing every day with what it's been like for so many students, the isolation, the severity of depression, the number of kids who have had to be hospitalized this year because of the severity of their mental illness, the number of parents who have died, and these kids have been at home. There are a lot of stories.
Yeah, the kids in abusive homes who couldn't escape the abuse. It's been awful. I just feel like there's been a lot more negative, some positive, but a lot more negative than positive.
And that's the nature of a pandemic.
Yeah, I won't remember 2020 fondly, other than I kept the twins and got to expand what I know about God with you guys.
Well, and obviously the challenge that I'm presenting to you guys is, what can you take with you from this past year? And it doesn't have to all be related to the pandemic. I know for myself, the demonstrations over the past year, I am not condoning violent or behaviors or vandalism or anything like that, but that making me think more about the experiences of minorities in the country is something that I hope to take with me as well. So,
I read online yesterday a very interesting statement that I had never thought about. It was from a woman who was native, I guess, Inuit, Eskimo, I guess you want to call it. And she said, okay, so you're all complaining about the possibility of having to carry vaccination passports. She said, I have had to carry a card that breaks down my genetic heritage my whole life. Why? And I went, whoa. So, yeah, I mean, I never would have thought about that. Native Americans, American Indians, whatever, don't they also have to carry a card that states that they are, what their breakdown is? Why? I don't understand, so I just thought about that. I thought, yeah, I have no right if somebody says, if you want to be able to say, I am part of this group that has been immunized, you must carry a document that says you have. And yet, is it that? Is it, I don't know. The whole thing just was it was something I had never thought of as people of a minority status, that they go through and they accept it, and it never occurred to me.
Well, we had Native American kids at Manchester High when I was there. And I know one reason they carry it is if you want free government benefits like college and such, you have to be minimum 25% Native American. So you have to show on that ID card that at least one of your grandparents was Native American to get certain federal benefits. So the ID card is because federal laws were set up that granted them benefits, but they have to show what percent Native American they are. That's one reason they have those cards.
Yeah, and I guess if we want to, let's say if I want to go to a concert, I would be expected to carry something that says I have been immunized and I can be allowed in. So I kind of understand it in that sense, but at the same time, her post said, you make me carry something the same way you have that for a dog or a horse to prove they're, purebred or whatever. She said, that's, and I went, yeah, that I never thought about that. So.
All right, technical people, how long would it take to put up one of those vaccination cards on a scanner and mass produce them and hand them out in front of the concert like a scalper, selling them for $1 a piece to anybody who isn't vaccinated?
Exactly.
I think it's being done.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. Oh
Well,
goodness.
police officer, and Nancy, you can speak to this, but all the crime activities or illegal things of that nature that happen, they once told me that, nothing's changed. It's just a new technology and a new way to scam people. So they scammed people in 1930 and they'll do it in 2030.
Yeah.
And it's like if you wanted to drink when you were young, you faked a driver's license or whatever you needed, some kind of card, and you went on, So
Well,
the way it
getting
is.
back to the Bible, did the Pharisees scam Judas, or did Judas go to the Pharisees first? Was he bribed, or did he go looking? Who approached who? I don't remember. Did the Pharisees try to scam the disciples by looking for a traitor, or did Judas go to them first?
Well, what difference would it make?
Well, my point is, you guys are talking about scams and all that. It's been going on since Cain killed Abel, probably.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
that's
not,
one of the deeper questions that I always struggle with. Why is that? Why was humanity created that way?
God created us with choices, greed, just people always wanting more.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's move to, we've got our own commission here ahead of us as far as what we want to take with us from this past year or not. But so let's look at Jesus and the disciples to maybe help inspire us. So then verses 37 through 38, who would like to read those? Page
I'll
4.
read.
Okay.
Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out workers for his harvest.
Okay. So Barclay makes the point that the Pharisees saw the masses, saw the people as chaff to be destroyed and burned up, whereas Jesus saw them as the harvest to be reaped and to be saved. So how we view humanity, I think I see it as a challenge to us. How do we view humanity ourselves?
But when you say chaff to be burned up, does that mean they saw the people as unworthy and only they as Pharisees were worthy of God's, attention? Or
That's how Barclay seems to interpret it. Barclay goes on to make the point that the harvest, though, will never be reaped unless there are reapers to reap it. Unless there are people to do God's work.
Yeah, but isn't it safe to say all of us on this Zoom are workers in the harvest? We're trying to do our part.
Then it's an ongoing call to us, I think.
Oh, sure.
Yep.
God presents opportunities to everybody every day. You just have to act on them or not. I don't act on every opportunity. So I could do more.
Triggering for me a complex thought that I'm going to kind of fumble around to try to say, but it's kind of back to your awareness that you talked about through various demonstrations and so forth that have happened. You're more culturally aware of inconsistencies in the way things are handled and one thing and another. I really am fumbling around here with this, but it's something about, isn't it our human nature? There's always a us and them. There's always we look down on certain blue collar workers, if you will, or whatever. It's always there. And I think that what I'm kind of picking up for myself out of this conversation is I'm already aware of that and sensitive to it, but it's like an increased awareness of how judgmental we can all be. We to blow some people off because they're not as important as others. I'm really fumbling at this, but we're triggering some thought there.
I always get really frustrated because people who are trying to be harvesters, reapers, we go out and try to help groups of people, and many people respond positively. So you feel good about that. But there are so many people that good workers try to help and they don't respond. So I think, Bud, they become, for me, in that group, well, we tried to help you and you wouldn't let us help you. So we write them off, for lack of a better term.
One for me is Jesus saying you go to a town and you spread the word, and if they don't take it, you knock the stuff off your feet and move on, because that's going to continue to happen, you know. And I get frustrated, and it's relates to driving down the street and seeing people on the corner. Am I really going to help this person with $5, or am I going to give them another fix? You know, and so therefore I'm judgmental. I'm already judging these people as being less than me or whatever. I mean, if you honestly say that, and I'm ashamed of that, but it's the truth.
Well, but Kitten, sort of going along with what Bud was saying and what you were saying too, that we also have the challenge of being mindful of how we help people. In a staff meeting just recently, the topic was working with refugee families, newly arrived refugee families, which over the past year, there haven't been that many, but there's been enough that some workers from the refugee agencies that are left were meeting with us, and they were like, hey, you know, they were having to remind some folks that, yes, these folks came here, they're new to the country, they don't know all the procedures and the policies, they don't know all your practices. And when you come in and try to give them this information in English that they don't understand, and you don't try to help them, you're setting them up to fail. And so, so that kind of thing, you know, when Satina and the boys came, boy, that really, we all had to really think through, you know, the different way things worked and helping them understand some things. There were some things they came knowing that we were surprised about. But then some other things that, you know, like I can remember the first time I sat down, this is a silly example, but first time I sat down with the boys to play cards, and they were cursing up a storm, you know. I was like, what? I mean, just like, you know, get the card they don't like, they'd be like, there, you know, the words would come flying. I was like, whoa, guys, that's what they had seen in movies. They had no clue what those words meant here. So, I mean, it was the F-bomb, and I'm not kidding you.
Oh, my.
Yes. So that experience, and it's when I explained it to them, it never happened again. But that's an example of how, you know, people and, you know, their path in life has been different. You know, not everybody's path has been a white middle class path. So
Well, we were lucky that they could speak English. That helped greatly.
yes, it did. It did. It did. But anyhow, but that's just a fun example, but there's, you know, lots of serious examples.
I like the Go ahead, Sarah.
Story. When I was teaching, if a student tried to get good grades, it was because he was trying to be white. And there was serious peer pressure against trying to do your best in college. And so that was probably the most frustrating part of my job for my entire career. You know, at Virginia Union, it wasn't quite as bad, but it was really bad at Virginia State. But it's everywhere. You don't do that, because then you're you know, so, you know, I'm trying to help them for something that'll help them for the rest of their lives, and they don't want it.
How complex.
You know, just, you know, even within this country, the different subcultures, and that just, it's still just,
yeah.
And we had a consultant come for something, and he had adopted a Black kid. And so this guy has a PhD, the kid is brilliant, and the kid is purposely not doing well because his Black friends are saying, hey, you try to be white, you got a white dad, you try to get good grades, and the kid starts flunking out of school just to fit in.
Mhm.
I like Barclay's example in the book about Martin Luther. Martin Luther had a friend who was a priest who said, I'll pray and you do the work. And God sent him a vision that showed a huge field of corn. And Martin Luther was the only guy reaping the corn. And he said, okay, I get it. We need more reapers, not people just praying. So, and like I said before, those of us in this Zoom are reapers. We're doing what we can to help others. But there are lots of people that think just donating money is enough or just praying is enough. And I think we're really called to pray, to donate money, and to do what work we can to help others.
Yeah, we're called to live the Christian life. You know, Barclay, well, maybe it's later, talks about how, you know, we are called to show we are Christians by our behavior, not by our words so much, but by how we live our lives, by what we do. How
Yeah,
we
that
act.
was a couple of pages back.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's, it's 9:46. So let's wind up by talking about summoning his disciples. Somebody like to read verses 1-4 of chapter 10.
I'll do that. And when he had summoned his 12 disciples, he gave them power over unclean spirits so that they were able to cast them out, and so that they were able to heal every disease and every sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First and foremost, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, and the tax collector James, and the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, who was also his betrayer.
You know, here we are at chapter 10, and Matthew is, you know, I always think in my brain, I always expect the disciples to be listed at the beginning of the book, but here we are at chapter 10 when Matthew does that. So some interesting points. The word apostles, these are the names of the 12 apostles. That is the only time that Matthew uses the word apostles to refer to the 12. That's the only time. And one resource that I read, it is Luke that makes the distinction of the 12 apostles. The other gospels don't really make that big a point about it, you know, that there was really a group of disciples, and so among them were these 12. It seems to be how most of the other books approach it, but anyhow, so so there's two facts about the 12 that Barclay wants to highlight about them, and I think we all probably have heard these before, that they're very ordinary people. You know, and throughout the Bible, you know, one of the things I really like about the Old Testament is how flawed major people are in the Old Testament, like David, you know, that are called to be great leaders. And the New Testament, they're also just ordinary people, everyday people, just as we are. And that it was a very extraordinary mixture too of very ordinary people. That it was not a homogenous group. Everybody wasn't the same. Yeah, a number of them we know from pulling all the information together were fishermen, but there also was a tax collector, Simon the Zealot. He was, the Zealots were considered to be, I think nowadays would be considered kind of a radical group. So they were quite a combination. So, and that number 12, the 12 apostles, you know, is suggestive of the 12 tribes. So pulling that imagery together and how important that is in the Jewish community. So Barclay makes a point at the end of page 415 that although we don't know much about these 12 men, the New Testament is very conscious of their greatness in the church. For the book of Revelation tells us that the 12 foundation stones of the holy city are inscribed with their names. So that as the church was beginning to form, these 12 names were important in the early church, and they're still important to us. These 12 men with no great background from many differing spheres of belief were the foundation stones on which the church was built. So points that Barclay makes about their calling: Jesus chose them. They were chosen by Jesus to be disciples. He called them. Jesus doesn't compel us to do his work. He offers us to do it. He seeks volunteers. He appointed them. And Barclay makes the point about that word, which is translated as ordained, is a Greek word which means to make or to do, but is often technically used for appointing to some office. So among all of Jesus' disciples, these men were appointed, and the word disciple means a leader. They were chosen to be with Jesus, so they were equal in that selection. They were called to be apostles, and the word apostle literally means one who is sent out. So while disciple literally means learner, apostle means being sent out. And they were heralds of Christ, and so they were bidden to preach.
Interesting that you said that disciple means a leader.
No, teacher. I mean,
I thought you
learner.
said leader at one point.
Learner.
Learner.
Disciple is.
Yeah, the word disciple literally means learner. Yeah, so it's.
Heard it wrong, I'm sorry.
So as disciples of Christ, whether with a capital D, as in the DOC, or with a little d, meaning universal, disciple of Christ, we're called to be learners, I think. We're called, it's an ongoing learning. So here we are in our, 50s, 60s, and 70s, continuing to learn. And I hope I continue to learn throughout my life, that there's that ongoing calling to us to learn and to do and to be, that we're called for all of that.
The exciting part about that learning process for me is I'm 74 and I feel like I wasted about 72 of those years, and I'm just excited to start learning.
Yeah. I know. And what's going to be the next thing to learn?
I learn something new every day. Every day. I look forward to it.
Even during a pandemic.
Yep. I didn't say it was all positive. Don't forget to send Sarah your checks, guys.
Yep. So
Thanks,
all right,
guys.
so we'll end at this point, and
In that message, just quickly in that message, let's give a cutoff date so Sarah has time to purchase these things.
Oh, I'm going shopping tomorrow. I have faith that the money will come.
There you go, girl. There's a blessing.
We're gonna send you a check, Sarah.
Okay.
yeah, I'll send you a check too. All
Okay.
right, and I'll send out that email today, because there are several other people from the Sojourners class that regularly supported doing the kit. So
And I'm going to mention the $75 will buy one bucket so people will know that.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks.
see y'all in worship.
All right, bye-bye, thank you.